a human heartbeat lasts a little under a second. It feels like nothing. It passes without notice, one contraction blending into the next. But that same interval, placed somewhere else in the universe, does not behave the same way. Near a neutron star, where gravity compresses space itself, that single beat stretches outward, while one heart completes a cycle. Years elsewhere slip by unnoticed. The body experiences continuity, but the universe does not agree. Life is built on the assumption that time moves uniformly. One moment replaces the next. Events line up cleanly. Childhood becomes adulthood. Adulthood becomes memory. The sequence feels so stable that it rarely draws attention. But that stability is not a property of time itself. It is a property of how experience is assembled. From the outside, physics does not recognize a shared present. There is no universal instant that everything occupies together. What appears simultaneous in one frame separates cleanly in another. Two events can agree on location, but disagree on order. This is not philosophical speculation. It is a direct consequence of how information travels and how matter curves space. Before reaching relativity, the problem already exists inside the body. Perception is delayed. Signals move at finite speed. Light reflected from the environment must be absorbed, converted into chemical change, translated into electrical activity, routed through layered neural structures, and reconstructed into something coherent. By the time awareness registers an event, the event itself is already over. What feels immediate is always slightly late. That delay is small enough to ignore. It has to be. If it were not hidden, coordination would fail. Movement would feel unstable. The world would appear to lag behind itself. To prevent that, the brain compensates. It predicts. It fills gaps. It presents a seamless sequence that feels like now. But the sequence is a construction, not a direct feed. The result is subtle, but profound. Awareness never occupies the leading edge of reality. It follows behind it, assembled from signals that have already finished traveling. The present is not something that is entered. It is something that is reconstructed. Once that is recognized, the idea of time as a flowing line becomes harder to defend. If experience arrives late, then the boundary between past and present is already blurred. And if that boundary is blurred at the smallest scale, it cannot remain clean at the largest. Once that boundary begins to blur, a more uncomfortable question appears. If awareness is always late, then the present is never actually being experienced as it exists. What feels immediate is already a memory by the time it arrives. The sensation of now is not a point in time. It is a stitched summary of signals that finished traveling a fraction of a second ago. That delay is not unique to vision. Every sense carries it. Sound arrives after air has moved. Touch arrives after nerves have fired. Even pain is registered only after damage has already occurred. The body reacts first, and awareness follows. Experience lags behind reality in every direction. The only reason this goes unnoticed is because the delays are small and consistent. The brain compensates by predicting what should be happening next. It uses past patterns to estimate where objects will be, how fast they are moving, and what will likely follow. That estimate is presented as the present. Most of the time it works. When it fails, the illusion briefly cracks. Objects appear to jump. Motion feels wrong. Accidents happen not because reality changes, but because prediction falls out of alignment. This means that what feels like direct contact with the world is actually an internal model kept just ahead of outdated information. Awareness does not track reality in real time. It chases it. The present becomes a moving guess, corrected continuously but never fully caught. Once this is accepted, time stops behaving like a clean sequence. The present is no longer a sharp edge dividing what was from what will be. It is a blurred region assembled after the fact, maintained only because the brain cannot afford to show the delay honestly. And this problem does not stay confined to biology. It becomes far more severe once motion and gravity are introduced. The same logic that delays perception also applies to the universe itself. Information never travels instantly. There is a maximum speed. Because of that limit, different observers cannot agree on what is happening at the same moment. The idea of a shared now begins to fall apart, long before reaching cosmic scales. At that point, time stops looking like a river and starts looking like a structure. Events no longer line up behind one another in a single file. They occupy positions. Order becomes dependent on perspective. What counts as present for one observer is already past or still future for another. And once time is reduced to position rather than flow, the assumption that life moves forward through it quietly breaks. Once time is reduced to position rather than flow, the idea of moving through it becomes harder to justify. Movement implies change. But relativity does not describe time as something that advances. It treats it as a dimension that already exists, laid out alongside space. Events do not emerge into being and then disappear. They occupy locations. What changes is not the universe, but the path taken through it. This is where the idea of a universal present finally collapses. If time were flowing uniformly, there would be a single slice of reality labeled now, shared by everything everywhere. Physics does not allow this. The speed of light sets a limit on how quickly information can travel, and that limit fractures the present into countless local versions. Two observers moving differently through space will slice reality at different angles. They will disagree on what is happening at the same time, and neither perspective is privileged. This is not a theoretical curiosity. It is a structural feature of the universe. Events that appear simultaneous from one viewpoint become ordered from another. One observer sees cause followed by effect. Another sees the same two events reversed. Both descriptions are correct within their own frame. There is no deeper layer where the disagreement is resolved. At human speeds and distances, these differences are too small to notice. Everyday life smooths them away. But scale exposes them. Extend those tiny disagreements across astronomical distances, and the divergence becomes enormous. A slight change in motion here corresponds to a radically different slice of time elsewhere. The present fractures into a patchwork of incompatible moments, all equally real. This forces a difficult conclusion. If different observers legitimately occupy different presents, then the present cannot be something that comes into existence. It cannot be something that moves. It must already be there, fixed, with observers simply intersecting different cross-sections of it. From this perspective, the universe begins to resemble a complete structure rather than an unfolding story. Past and future stop being categories of existence and become coordinates. Events are not erased when they are over. They remain exactly where they are, permanently embedded in the geometry of space-time. This idea is often called the block universe. The name sounds abstract, but the implication is simple. Everything that ever happens exists equally. The formation of stars, the decay of atoms, the birth of a person, and the moment of their death are all part of the same static structure. Nothing is waiting to happen. Nothing has vanished. Change is not a feature of the universe itself. It is a feature of how consciousness encounters it. From inside this structure, the illusion of motion is unavoidable. Awareness follows a path through the block, registering one event after another. Memory accumulates in one direction. Anticipation points in the other. That asymmetry creates the sensation of flow, but the flow belongs to experience, not to time. This reframing quietly alters the meaning of beginnings and endings. Birth is no longer an event that brings something into existence. It is a location where a world line begins. Death is not an event that removes something from reality. It is a location where that world line ends. Both are equally present in the structure, separated not by disappearance, but by distance. From the outside, nothing is moving. From the inside, everything feels urgent. The contrast between those two descriptions is not something that can be resolved. It is built into the way observers exist within the system they are observing. At this point, a familiar objection usually arises. If all moments exist, then why does anything seem to change at all? Why does memory point backward? Why does anticipation point forward? Why does the past feel fixed while the future feels open? The answer does not come from relativity. It comes from statistics. It comes from entropy. The fundamental laws of physics do not prefer a direction of time. They work equally well forwards and backwards. Equations that describe motion, fields, and interactions remain valid if time is reversed. Nothing in the core machinery demands that effects follow causes. That ordering emerges elsewhere. Entropy provides the distinction. It measures how many microscopic arrangements correspond to the same macroscopic state. Ordered states are rare. Disordered states are common. As systems evolve, they overwhelmingly move toward configurations that can be realized in more ways. That statistical tendency creates an arrow, not because time flows, but because disorder increases. Memory depends on this imbalance. Recording information requires low entropy states. Once information is dispersed, it cannot be recovered. The past feels fixed because information about it exists. The future feels open because it has not yet been recorded. The asymmetry is not temporal. It is informational. This is why experience has direction even if time does not. Consciousness rides the gradient of entropy. It accumulates records of lower entropy states and moves toward higher entropy ones. The sensation of becoming older is not evidence that time is passing. It is evidence that order is degrading. This distinction matters because it removes the last refuge of the flowing time intuition. If the arrow comes from entropy rather than time itself, then time does not do the work people usually assign to it. It does not carry events forward. It does not create novelty. It does not erase the past. It simply provides a dimension along which entropy gradients are expressed. And once that is accepted, the question of when something happens becomes inseparable from where it is in the structure. Birth and death are no longer opposite ends of a journey. They are fixed features of the same object, connected by a world line that already exists in full. From that perspective, the idea of being born and dying at the same moment stops sounding poetic and starts sounding literal. Both events are equally present. They differ only in which slice of the structure awareness happens to occupy. And awareness, like everything else, is constrained by the same geometry. Awareness moving along a world line feels like progression because memory only accumulates in one direction. Records form. Traces are left behind. Causes appear to precede effects because entropy makes it overwhelmingly likely that information about one state exists, while information about the reverse does not. But none of this requires time itself to move. It only requires that states differ in how many ways they can be arranged. Once this distinction is clear, a deeper problem emerges. If all moments exist within the same structure, then the future is not something that is created as time passes. It already occupies its place. The only thing missing is access. And access is limited not by time, but by causality. Information cannot travel faster than light. This single constraint fractures reality into regions that can influence one another and regions that cannot. Every event sits inside a causal bubble defined by this limit. Some parts of the universe can affect the present location. Some parts never will. Some parts already have. The result is a structure where each observer occupies a private slice of what is reachable and what is not. This structure is often described using light cones. The past light cone contains all events that could have influenced the present location. The future light cone contains all events that could be influenced by it. Everything else lies outside. Those events exist, but they are causally disconnected. They cannot be reached, observed, or altered from this position in space-time. This introduces a subtle form of isolation that is easy to miss. Even within the same universe, no two observers share exactly the same causal access. Slight differences in position and motion alter which events fall into which category. The idea of a single shared reality becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. From this perspective, the sense of togetherness that defines everyday life is an approximation. Conversations happen. Actions seem coordinated. Causes appear to line up neatly. But underneath that surface, coherence lies a fractured structure where each observer occupies a slightly different version of the present, stitched together by delayed signals and predictions. This fragmentation becomes more severe as distances increase. Light from distant stars takes years to arrive. Light from distant galaxies takes millions of years. What appears as a point of light in the sky is not a star as it is, but as it was long ago. Entire civilizations could rise and collapse between emission and observation without leaving any trace. This means that the universe is never encountered as it exists. It is always encountered as it was. Observation is not a window into reality. It is an archaeological act. Signals are fossils. The present sky is a layered record of incompatible times presented simultaneously. Once this is recognized, the distinction between past and present begins to dissolve further. The past is not gone. It is visible. The future is not unreal. It is merely unobservable from this location. Both are equally part of the same structure. The difference is not existence, but accessibility. This reframes causality itself. Causes do not march forward creating effects. Both cause and effect occupy positions in space-time. Their relationship is geometric rather than temporal. One lies within the light cone of the other. That is all that distinguishes them. This geometric view removes the need for time to flow. It also removes the need for events to come into being. Everything that will ever happen already has a location. The path through those locations is constrained, but the structure itself is complete. At this point, the intuition of choice begins to strain. Decisions feel like branching points. Options appear open until one is selected. But in a block universe, branches do not exist. There is only a single world line connecting one state to the next. Alternatives are imagined, not realized. The sensation of choosing arises because awareness does not have access to future records. From within the structure, the next location is unknown. That ignorance feels like freedom. But ignorance is not the same as indeterminacy. A book can be unread without being unwritten. This distinction becomes uncomfortable when applied to life events. The first memory, the last breath, every conversation in between all occupy fixed positions. From the outside, nothing changes. From the inside, uncertainty persists because information has not yet arrived. This is why the future feels open, even if it is not. Openness is a property of knowledge, not of reality. The structure does not care whether it is anticipated. It exists regardless. Once this framework is accepted, time stops behaving like a medium and starts behaving like a coordinate system. Just as locations exist without being visited, moments exist without being experienced. Experience moves. Time does not. This leads to a conclusion that sounds extreme only because intuition resists it. Birth and death do not sit on opposite ends of a process. They are adjacent features of a static object, extended along a dimension that awareness traverses sequentially. The feeling of distance between them is not created by time itself. It is created by memory. Memory fills the gap. Remove memory, and the separation collapses. This helps explain why unconsciousness feels like an instant. Sleep passes without duration. Anesthesia erases hours. Coma collapses years. When memory formation stops, the sensation of time disappears with it. The structure remains intact, but the path through it is not recorded. This reveals something important. Time as experienced is not fundamental. It is an emergent bookkeeping system used by biological organisms to track change. When that system fails or pauses, time vanishes subjectively without affecting the structure underneath. From the outside, nothing is missing. From the inside, everything jumps. This also explains why the end of life cannot be experienced as an extended event. The final loss of memory collapses the remaining distance. Subjectively, the final moment arrives immediately after the last recorded one. Objectively, both have always been there. The unsettling part is not that life ends. It is that, from the perspective of the structure, it never began in the way intuition suggests. The entire world line exists as a whole. Experience samples it one slice at a time. This reframing removes the comfort of imagining that time carries events away. Nothing is carried. Nothing fades. Everything remains exactly where it is. The universe does not forget. It does not move on. It simply contains. And within that containment, awareness traces a narrow path, mistaking motion through records for motion of reality itself. Once the universe is understood as a complete structure rather than a process, the usual language used to describe existence begins to fail. Words like becoming, passing, and moving forward no longer refer to anything fundamental. They describe how awareness encounters the structure, not how the structure itself behaves. The universe does not progress. It simply is. This creates a quiet contradiction at the center of everyday experience. Life feels like a sequence of moments unfolding, yet physics describes a reality where all moments coexist. Both descriptions function. Neither can replace the other. The tension between them is not a mistake. It is the price of being an observer embedded within the thing being observed. At this point, it becomes necessary to address a common misunderstanding. Treating time as a static dimension does not mean nothing happens. Events still occur relative to one another. Causes still relate to effects. Thermodynamic processes still run. What disappears is the idea that the universe itself is updating. There is no global refresh. There is no master clock advancing the system from one state to the next. Instead, every state is already present, arranged within the geometry of space-time. What gives the impression of evolution is the fact that observers only ever encounter one cross-section at a time. Memory accumulates. Anticipation forms. The brain fills in continuity between those slices. The result feels like motion. This perspective changes the role of the present entirely. The present is no longer a boundary between what exists and what does not. It becomes a label for where awareness happens to be located. There is nothing privileged about that location. It is not more real than any other. It is simply the only one being experienced. This leads to a subtle but important consequence. If the present is not fundamental, then neither is the idea that events come into existence when they are experienced. Observation does not create reality. It only reveals a local slice of it. Everything else remains equally real, whether or not it is being accessed. That conclusion sits uneasily alongside intuition, especially when applied to personal history. The childhood memory, the current moment, and the final moment of life all feel separated by duration. But in the block view, they coexist as parts of a single, extended object. The separation is experiential, not structural. This is why attempts to locate a universal now always fail. Any definition that works locally breaks globally. Any definition that works globally breaks locally. The concept itself assumes something physics does not provide. There is no single time that everything shares. Once this is accepted, the problem of simultaneity ceases to be a technical detail and becomes central. Two events that appear simultaneous from one viewpoint may not be simultaneous from another. There is no deeper frame where the disagreement disappears. Both descriptions are equally valid. The universe allows incompatible presents to exist side by side. This incompatibility is not resolved by waiting. It is not smoothed out over time. It is permanent. The structure contains all of them at once. The feeling that there must be a correct ordering is a psychological residue, not a physical requirement. At this stage, the idea that time flows begins to look like a useful fiction. It organizes experience. It allows planning. It supports memory. But it does not describe how reality is built. It describes how limited observers navigate it. This distinction becomes clearer when considering situations where the experience of time fails. Deep sleep eliminates awareness of duration. Anesthesia erases entire intervals. Certain neurological conditions compress or stretch subjective time dramatically. None of these alter the external structure. They alter only how slices are recorded. When memory formation stops, the sense of time passing stops with it. From the inside, the gap collapses. From the outside, nothing changes. The block remains intact. Only the path through it loses continuity. This suggests that duration, as experienced, is inseparable from memory. Without memory, there is no before and after. There is only presence. This presence does not require time to flow. It requires only that awareness is located somewhere. The final moment of consciousness, therefore, does not arrive gradually. There is no subjective countdown. The last recorded moment is followed immediately by nothing. The remaining distance along the world line exists, but it is never experienced. From within, the transition is instantaneous. This observation removes a common fear about endings. There is no experience of extended absence. There is no sensation of infinite darkness. There is only the last recorded moment, and then no further records. The structure still contains everything beyond that point, but awareness does not continue into it. This does not mean death is trivial. It means that its structure is different from how it is usually imagined. It is not a plunge into a new state. It is the termination of recording. The world line continues to exist as a whole, but experience does not traverse beyond its endpoint. Seen this way, birth and death become symmetrical. Neither is an entry into existence or an exit from it. Both are boundaries of a recorded path. Everything between them remains permanently embedded in the structure. This symmetry is unsettling because it removes the idea that time carries life forward. Life is not being moved. It is being sampled. Each moment exists independently of whether it is remembered or anticipated. Once this is fully absorbed, the intuition that life unfolds toward an open future becomes harder to sustain. The future may be unknown, but unknown is not the same as undetermined. The structure does not change based on awareness of it. This brings the discussion back to causality. Causes do not push effects into being. They coexist with them at different locations. The apparent direction of causation arises because information flows in one direction due to entropy, not because time enforces an order. This also explains why the future cannot be remembered. Remembering requires records. Records require low entropy. The future has not yet left records, not because it does not exist, but because information from those regions has not reached this one. From this perspective, the present is not a knife edge dividing existence from non-existence. It is a locality where information is available. Everything else is inaccessible, not unreal. And this reframing sets the stage for a deeper discomfort. If the structure is complete, and if the path through it is fixed, then the sense of choice requires closer inspection. The feeling of alternatives may not correspond to multiple realities. It may correspond only to missing information. That question cannot be avoided much longer. The sense of choice feels immediate and personal. Decisions appear to form in real time. Options are weighed. One is selected. Action follows. The sequence feels clean enough that it rarely draws suspicion. But when examined through the same lens already applied to time, the structure of choice begins to look less flexible than it appears. Every decision is implemented by physical processes. Neurons fire. Chemicals diffuse. Electrical patterns shift. None of this happens outside the laws that govern the rest of the universe. The brain is not exempt from causality. It is an arrangement of matter responding to prior states. That alone does not eliminate choice, but it reframes it. What feels like a moment of free selection becomes the visible surface of a process already underway. Experiments have shown that neural activity associated with an action appears before conscious awareness of deciding. The body begins to act, and only afterward does the sense of intention register. Awareness is not initiating the process. It is being informed of it. The delay is small, but it is consistent. And it mirrors the same lag already seen in perception. This creates an uncomfortable symmetry. Just as awareness lags behind sensory input, it also lags behind decision-making. In both cases, the feeling of immediacy is a reconstruction. The present moment is assembled after the relevant processes have already occurred. This does not turn behavior into randomness, nor does it imply that actions are disconnected from reasons. The brain still evaluates information. It still responds to goals, memories, and constraints. But the feeling of authorship becomes suspect. What is experienced as a choice may be the brain reporting the outcome of its own activity. When this is combined with the block universe perspective, the implications sharpen. If every event occupies a fixed position, then decisions do not open new branches. They mark locations where one outcome exists, and others do not. Alternatives feel real because awareness has not yet reached the next slice. But from the outside, There is no fork. The sense of possibility is therefore tied to ignorance. It is not evidence that multiple futures exist. It is evidence that information about the next state has not yet arrived. The world line contains one sequence. Awareness encounters it without preview. This explains why regret and relief are possible. Once awareness reaches a particular location, it gains access to records of what did and did not occur. Paths that were imagined but never realized appear as lost possibilities. But they were never part of the structure. They existed only as mental constructs generated by incomplete information. This reframing removes a common source of anxiety while introducing a different kind. The anxiety of making the wrong choice gives way to the discomfort of recognizing that the choice was never open in the way it felt. What was unknown felt undecided. But unknown and undecided are not the same thing. At this stage, it becomes tempting to retreat, to reject the framework as too cold, too detached from lived experience. But the framework has not added anything exotic. It has simply followed the same logic applied earlier. Time does not flow. The present is not universal. Awareness arrives late. Records accumulate in one direction due to entropy. Decisions emerge from physical processes before being reported consciously. Each step is supported independently. Together, they point toward the same structure. The structure does not care about comfort. It does not adjust itself to preserve intuitive ideas about agency or becoming. It exists, whether or not it is acknowledged. This does not render experience meaningless. It changes what meaning refers to. Meaning no longer comes from shaping an open future. It comes from occupying a particular path within a complete structure. The significance of events lies in their relationships, not in their novelty. This perspective also alters how beginnings and endings are understood. The beginning of a life is not a moment where something new appears out of nothing. It is a boundary where a world line begins. The ending is not a disappearance. It is a boundary where that line stops being extended by records. Between those boundaries lies a fixed sequence of states. From the outside, they coexist. From the inside, they are encountered sequentially. The tension between those views does not resolve. It persists because awareness is limited to one position at a time. This limitation is not a flaw. It is what makes experience possible. If awareness had access to the entire structure at once, there would be no sequence, no anticipation, no memory. Everything would collapse into a single, undifferentiated presence. Experience requires restriction. The unsettling part is that this restriction creates the illusion of motion. Awareness moves because it cannot do otherwise. It does not reveal time passing. It reveals access shifting. Once access is understood as the core mechanism, many familiar features of life fall into place. Surprise occurs when the next slice does not match expectation. Fear arises when anticipated future slices carry threat. Nostalgia forms when records of earlier slices are revisited. None of these require time to move. They require only that awareness encounters different locations without preview. This also clarifies why prediction plays such a central role in perception and behavior. The brain is constantly attempting to reduce uncertainty about the next slice. It builds models. It extrapolates. It fills gaps. The sense of continuity depends on this predictive machinery functioning well. When prediction fails, the illusion of smooth time cracks. Motion appears disjointed. Events feel out of order. Certain neurological conditions expose this fragility. Time feels stretched, compressed, or fractured, not because reality changes, but because the internal model fails to align with incoming records. This fragility suggests that the experience of time is not a direct perception of a physical quantity. It is an interface. It simplifies a complex structure into something navigable. The interface hides delays, suppresses contradictions, and enforces a single narrative thread. Interfaces are not false. They are selective. They trade accuracy for usability. The experience of time does the same. It sacrifices structural truth to allow coherent action. Once this is accepted, the question shifts. It is no longer whether time really flows. It is why the illusion is so persistent, why it feels not just convincing, but unavoidable. The answer lies in survival. Organisms that track change effectively outperform those that do not. A sense of before and after allows learning. A sense of continuity allows planning. A sense of urgency allows action. None of these require time to exist as a flowing entity. They require only that states can be ordered locally. The brain enforces that ordering relentlessly. It suppresses contradictions. It hides delays. It stitches gaps. The result is a stable narrative that feels like movement through time. But stability should not be mistaken for truth. The narrative works because it must, not because it reflects the underlying structure accurately. This brings the argument to a quiet threshold. The illusion of time is not a mistake to be corrected. It is a feature that cannot be removed without destroying experience itself. Awareness cannot see the structure whole. It can only traverse it. That traversal feels like living. And living, from the inside, will always feel as though it is moving forward, even if nothing is actually moving at all. If nothing is actually moving, then the question of where time appears to come from becomes unavoidable. The sensation is too consistent, too universal, to be dismissed as a minor error. Cultures separated by geography and history all converge on the same intuition. Time feels like something that carries events forward. The feeling persists even when the physics underneath it does not support that picture. The reason lies in how information is stored and lost. Every moment of experience leaves traces. Memories form. Physical records accumulate. Entropy ensures that these records are asymmetric. Information about earlier states survives. Information about later states does not. This imbalance creates a directional narrative even in a structure where no direction is built in. From the perspective of physics, the arrow of time is not a fundamental force. It is a statistical gradient. Systems evolve toward states that can be realized in more ways than they can evolve toward states that can be realized in fewer. Order gives way to disorder because disorder vastly outnumbers order. This movement does not require time to flow. It requires only probability. This statistical tendency explains why certain processes appear irreversible. A cup shatters. Heat spreads. Smoke disperses. The reverse processes are not forbidden. They are merely improbable to the point of practical impossibility. The equations allow reversal. The universe does not deliver it. Life exists by locally resisting this tendency. Biological systems maintain order by exporting disorder to their surroundings. Energy is consumed. Waste is expelled. Internal structure is preserved temporarily at the cost of increasing entropy elsewhere. The sense of time passing is inseparable from this process. Living systems are engines that burn low-entropy resources and convert them into heat. Aging follows the same logic. It is not a clock counting down. It is the gradual accumulation of microscopic damage, DNA errors, protein misfolding, cellular wear, repair mechanisms slow. Entropy gains ground. The experience of getting older is the experience of increasing disorder within a system that can no longer fully compensate. This explains why time feels personal. Different bodies age differently. Different brains encode memories differently. Different organisms experience duration differently. None of this reflects a universal flow. It reflects how quickly order decays within a particular structure. Even within a single body, time does not pass uniformly. Gravity ensures this. Parts of the body closer to the Earth experience time more slowly than parts farther away. The difference is small, but it is measurable. Atomic clocks placed at different heights tick at different rates. The head ages slightly faster than the feet. The body is not synchronized with itself. This internal desynchronization is rarely noticed because the differences are tiny. But their existence matters. They show that even the idea of a single personal time is an approximation. Time varies with position and motion at every scale. Extend this outward, and the divergence becomes dramatic. Clocks in orbit tick differently from clocks on the ground. Clocks moving at high speed tick differently from those at rest. These are not theoretical predictions. They are corrections built into everyday technology. Navigation systems fail without them. Time is already being managed as a variable, not assumed as a constant. The practical success of these corrections leaves little room for doubt. Time does not behave as intuition suggests. It stretches. It compresses. It fragments. The idea of a single timeline dissolves under measurement. This fragmentation reinforces the block view. If time can flow at different rates for different observers, then flow itself cannot be fundamental. Something cannot move at multiple speeds simultaneously unless movement is observer-dependent. The structure must already be there. Once the structure is accepted, the question of beginnings becomes stranger. The universe is usually described as having started at a particular moment, a beginning of time. But within the block view, this beginning is simply an edge of the structure. It is not a moment that came into being. It is a boundary where the structure does not extend further. The same applies to endings. Whether the universe ends in expansion, collapse, or thermal equilibrium, the end is not something that happens. It is a boundary where events cease to be connected by change. The entire lifespan of the universe exists between two edges, in the same way a line exists between 2 points. From the outside, nothing is unfolding. From the inside, everything feels temporary. This discrepancy leads naturally to a deeper discomfort. If the structure is fixed, and if awareness simply traces a path through it, then the sense of novelty becomes suspect. New experiences feel new because they are being encountered for the first time along that path. But novelty does not imply creation. It implies access. This reframing alters how personal history is understood. Memories do not mark events that have ceased to exist. They mark locations that awareness has already visited. The past is not gone. It is simply no longer being accessed. This also reframes anticipation. The future feels unreal because it has not been accessed, not because it does not exist. The asymmetry is experiential, not ontological. At this point, the structure begins to resemble a completed archive rather than a live broadcast. Awareness moves through it sequentially, retrieving records and forming expectations, but never altering what is stored. This archive analogy highlights another unsettling implication. If everything exists permanently, then nothing is erased. Mistakes do not vanish. Moments of joy do not fade. They remain embedded exactly where they occurred. The structure does not forget. It does not revise. It does not forgive. The common belief that time heals or that the past is left behind relies on the idea that time carries things away. In the block view, nothing is carried. Distance replaces disappearance. Events are not removed. They are simply no longer adjacent to the current slice. This helps explain why certain memories retain emotional intensity long after they occurred. The memory is not reaching backward into something that no longer exists. It is reconnecting awareness to a location that still exists, just not locally. The discomfort here is subtle. It is not that painful events persist. It is that they persist without fading. What fades is access, not existence. The same applies to moments of meaning. They are not transient sparks that briefly appear and vanish. They are fixed features of the structure. Their value does not decay with time. Only the ability to revisit them does. This perspective removes both the consolation and the fear often attached to impermanence. Nothing is truly lost. Nothing is truly escaping. Everything simply occupies its place. That realization brings the discussion to the edge of another question. If the structure is complete, and if awareness is constrained to move through it without altering it, then what happens over extremely long spans? What happens when entropy reaches its limit? What happens when change itself runs out? This is where time appears to end, not with a moment, but with the exhaustion of gradients. When energy differences vanish, processes stop. Without processes, there are no records. Without records, awareness has nothing to traverse. The end of time is not a catastrophe. It is a quiet flattening. No explosions. No collapse. Just the absence of difference. In that state, the structure still exists. The archive remains intact. But nothing new can be accessed because nothing new can be recorded. From the inside, that state is unreachable. Awareness cannot experience the absence of change. It requires contrast. It requires structure. The end exists as a boundary, not as an experience. The unsettling implication is that from the perspective of the structure, life and its end coexist timelessly. From the perspective of awareness, the end arrives immediately after the last recorded moment. The gap collapses. This does not require speculation. It follows directly from how memory and entropy interact. When recording stops, so does the experience of duration. This realization shifts the meaning of eternity. Eternity is not something endured. It is something contained. The structure holds everything at once. Awareness samples it briefly. This leads to a final pressure point in the reasoning. If the universe exists long enough, and if the structure is finite in its possible arrangements, then repetition becomes unavoidable. Not repetition of experience, but repetition of configuration. Statistical mechanics predicts that given enough time, any finite system will return arbitrarily close to a previous state. The universe is vast, but it is not infinite in complexity. The number of possible configurations, while enormous, is finite. Over unimaginable spans, configurations repeat. Atoms rearrange. Patterns reappear. Structures that once existed can exist again. Not by intention, not by design, by inevitability. This is where the idea of spontaneous observers enters the discussion. Given enough time, random fluctuations can assemble complex structures temporarily. A brain-like configuration can arise, complete with internal states that resemble memory. This possibility is not invoked because it is likely in any practical sense. It is invoked because it is permitted by the same laws already accepted. The mathematics does not forbid it. That alone is enough to unsettle the picture. If a single observer-like structure is vastly easier to assemble by chance than an entire low-entropy universe, then probability begins to favor isolated observers over coherent histories. This does not mean that current experience is illusory. It means that probability alone is a poor guide to reality at extreme scales. The role of this consideration is not to undermine existence. It is to show how fragile intuitions become when extended beyond the conditions they evolved to handle. Eternity is not a comfortable environment for reasoning. The more time stretches, the less reliable common sense becomes. Structures that feel stable locally become rare globally. Order becomes the exception. Disorder becomes the rule. This does not negate the structure already described. It reinforces it. A static archive containing every possible configuration does not privilege continuity. It contains everything, including improbable arrangements. The unsettling part is not that such configurations exist. It is that nothing in the structure prevents them. At this stage, the argument has closed most of the exits. Time does not flow. The present is not universal. Awareness arrives late. Records accumulate asymmetrically. Entropy supplies direction without motion. The structure is complete. Change is local. Choice reflects ignorance. Endings collapse subjectively. Repetition becomes statistically unavoidable given enough duration. None of these claims rely on mysticism. None require speculation beyond established frameworks. Each follows from accepting the same premises already required to make modern physics work. The discomfort arises not from adding something new, but from refusing to add comforting exceptions. What remains is not a dramatic conclusion, but a quiet one. If all moments exist, then birth and death are not separated by time in the way they appear to be. They are separated by memory. Remove memory, and the distance vanishes. From the perspective of the structure, the beginning and the end sit side by side. From the perspective of awareness, one feels distant and the other feels inevitable. Both views are correct, and neither allows time to exist in the way it feels like it does. At this point, the phrase "time does not exist" stops sounding provocative and starts sounding descriptive. Not because nothing happens, but because nothing needs time to happen. Events occupy locations. Relationships are geometric. Direction comes from entropy. Experience comes from memory. Flow is nowhere to be found. What remains is a structure where everything that ever occurs is already present. The universe does not advance toward anything. It does not correct itself. It does not improve or decay in any global sense. All of that language belongs to observers moving through it, not to the structure itself. This has an unsettling consequence for how life is usually framed. Life is often described as something that unfolds between birth and death, a process that begins, develops, and ends. But in a static structure, unfolding is a matter of perspective. The entire span exists at once. What changes is which part is being accessed. From the outside, a life is a complete object extended through space-time. From the inside, it feels like a journey. Both descriptions are accurate. Neither cancels the other, but only one reflects the underlying geometry. This reframing removes the idea that the present is privileged. The moment being experienced now is not more real than any other moment along the world line. It only feels special because awareness is located there. Every other moment exists with the same permanence, whether or not it is being remembered or anticipated. This includes moments that are usually described as gone. Childhood does not vanish. It remains exactly where it is. Loss does not erase what was lost. It only changes access. The structure keeps everything. What fades is the ability to reach it. This also includes moments that are usually described as not yet real. The future does not wait to be created. It occupies its place already. What is missing is information, not existence. That distinction quietly dismantles the idea that time carries things forward. Nothing is being carried. There is no current sweeping events along. There is only a fixed arrangement and a limited viewpoint moving through it. Once this is accepted, the relationship between birth and death becomes strange in a very specific way. They are no longer opposite ends of a process. They are adjacent features of the same object, separated not by disappearance, but by recorded states. The sense of distance between them is created by memory. Memory fills the gap with content, with narrative, with continuity. Remove memory, and the separation collapses. This is why unconsciousness erases duration. It is not that time speeds up or slows down. It is that time, as experienced, ceases to exist when recording stops. This explains a familiar but rarely examined fact. From the inside, the end does not feel far away. The final moment, whenever it occurs, arrives immediately after the last remembered one. No span is felt between them. The remaining distance exists only in the structure, not in experience. This does not mean the end is gentle or easy. It means it is not experienced as extended. There is no lingering awareness of absence. There is only the last accessible slice. Seen this way, the phrase "you are born and you die at the same moment" stops sounding metaphorical. It describes the relationship between two locations in a structure where distance is not measured by flow, but by access. From the outside, both are equally present. From the inside, memory stretches one away and collapses the other toward it. This perspective also reframes the fear of endings. The fear is not of an experience that follows death. There is no such experience. The fear is of the loss of continuity, of the termination of recording, of the structure becoming inaccessible beyond a certain point. That fear is real. But it is not about time running out. It is about access ending. This distinction matters because it removes the idea that time is an adversary. Time is not taking anything away. Nothing is being erased. What changes is the location of awareness and the availability of records. The universe does not hurry. It does not rush events toward oblivion. It simply contains them. This containment is neither kind nor cruel. It is indifferent. It does not preserve meaning. It does not destroy it. Meaning arises only locally, within paths traced through the structure. And those paths, while fixed, are not trivial. They are where experience happens. They are where memory accumulates. They are where suffering and joy occur. The fact that they are embedded in a static structure does not diminish their reality. It explains their shape. The discomfort comes from realizing that time was never the thing doing the work. Time did not create the story. It did not carry it forward. It did not end it. All of that was happening elsewhere, in entropy, in causality, in memory, in access. Time was a label applied after the fact. Once the label is removed, what remains is quieter, stranger, and harder to argue with. A universe that exists all at once. Lives that exist as complete objects. Experiences that move without anything else moving. In that universe, nothing is coming into being and nothing is passing away. There are only locations, connections, and the narrow path awareness traces between them. Birth and death are part of the same structure. They do not chase one another through time. They sit side by side, separated only by the records that make one feel distant and the other feel final. Time does not exist as a thing that flows. What exists is structure. What exists is access. And what exists, briefly and locally, is experience, mistaking its movement for the movement of reality itself.